What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of My Story Weaves Our Story. I'm your host, Gabriel, and along with my lovely co-host, Tina, we're kicking off season 2 of My Story Weaves Our Story. Now, in season 1, we did more panel discussions, but in season 2, we're going to be going back, looking at those conversations, and seeing if we can identify reoccurring themes. In this season, we want to focus on those themes and try to get deeper insights and one-on-one conversations. Now, to kick off season 2, we chose no other than Mr. Gene Kilby. Now, you may remember Mr. Kilby from our first episode where he talked about growing up in Warren County, integrating Warren County public schools, playing football, going to Howard University, and just more of his life story. Today, we're going to dive deeper into that life story. And man, I got to tell you, this was a very interesting conversation. This episode was fun for me because I learned a lot about history, I learned a lot about myself, and it made me grateful for a lot of things. Mr. Kilby and his family really went through a lot, paving the way for us. He is a true trailblazer in that sense. So please, sit back, buckle up, and enjoy this conversation. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode in a new season of My Story Weaves Our Story. I am your co-host, Gabriel, and this is my lovely co-host, Tina, and we are here with a very special guest. Not only is this a historical appearance on My Story Weaves Our Story because Mr. Kilby here was one of the first guests on one of our first episodes of this podcast, but he also has a lot of interesting and amazing history concerning Warren County, and we want to get into that today. So before we get started, one of the things that you said in your first appearance in the first podcast, you talked about that you and your family paid some heavy prices, and you used that word, and that word stuck out to me, that phrase, a heavy price in terms of Warren County. So if you could just take some time, I know you've done this before, but if you want to give a more detailed history of, why you would say you and your family paid a heavy price, and then we'll get into some more questions surrounding where we're at today. We talked about a little bit before off camera, where we've been and kind of what is important for us moving forward.
Well, the reason that the statement that our family paid a heavy price is because anytime that you're the first to do something, or if you're looked at as being the person who promotes doing something that other people don't like, you pay a price for that. I grew up my father had a farm in a little area outside of town called Happy Creek. He raised cattle, hogs, and chickens. So it was hard work all through our lives. But during the integration movement, after the court case was filed, things began to happen on the farm.
Are we talking Brown versus Board of Education?
After Brown versus Board of Education.
See, this is crazy for me because I read about this stuff in my history books growing up, and it's like kind of abstract, and you don't really think about it as, because it's so, to me, it feels so long ago. But I'm talking to someone who's like, no, I was very much there for that.
Yeah, Brown versus Board of Education was in 1954.
Okay.
My father filed a lawsuit in 1956 against Warren County Board of Education. My sister had become of age to go to high school. At that time, there wasn't a high school in Warren County for so-called colored people. So my brothers had been going to a boarding school. In a boarding school situation, anytime you get boys and girls together, there's all kinds of things, all kinds of things to go on.
Well,
so
not much has changed, I guess. That one thing's still consistent.
Yeah, so he didn't want my sister to be able to travel to either Berryville or Manassas and stay with people from Sunday night until they would come home Friday evening, spend the weekend at home. So that wasn't a very good situation. And he said that I pay taxes here in Warren County, and I want my children to go to Warren County High School. So in 1956, it was mainly a few African Americans who lived in a little settlement called Happy Creek, got together with the NAACP and filed this lawsuit. Betty Kilby, which was my sister's name, versus Warren County Board of Education. And of course, a lot of the Caucasian people didn't like it.
Yeah, because if I'm not mistaken, you said 1954, and at this point it's 1956. So had that ruling been out for a couple years, and why was there no integration immediately? Like, was it just...
Well, if you study Warren County's history, they've always been defiant about change.
Okay.
And it was just very difficult for them to accept African Americans to go to the same school as little white children. So
this is quite amazing. I'm like you, my mind is blown just thinking that we're here having a conversation with someone where your family has experienced this. So take us back to the price that you paid. You started to talk about the cattle and the farm. What were some of those things that were the price?
The price is that they killed some of our cows. They left bloody sheets on our mailbox. They shot through our house in order to get us to back down, to stop. They allowed a heavy pipe to drop on my father's back at the American Visco. So the attempt was to stop us by any means necessary, as some of the young people say. They killed our dog. They tried to barnstorm the NAACP meetings. And then not only the whites were angry with the family, with my father, because they're saying that he was going to get them killed. Some of the African Americans was against our family also. So we were getting it from both ends. Yeah.
That to me is probably the hardest part, because you were literally in between a rock and a hard place, and there's
Yes.
So what about your father? Because there's always got to be someone who leads, and people lead for different reasons. But what do you think made your father and your family so persistent in paying that price?
I think what made him do it is that he grew up on a farm in Rappahannock County, and they were more like sharecroppers over there. And he saw the things that happened to his father. He also purchased some land from this farmer. He paid for it. And when it was time for him to get the deed, the guy refused after he had taken his money. And he had his father, my father's father, testify against him in court. So he left Rappahannock County and bought land over here in Front Royal. So I think that put it put a mark on his heart.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to happen to him anymore, and that he was going to stand up for his rights.
Yeah, because it kind of seems like if no one stands up and makes the precedent that this isn't we are going to get what we're entitled to. If no one makes that precedent, whatever oppression or whatever coercion is going to keep going on.
That's right.
It's almost like if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Right.
So he was like, I'll be doggone, things are not going to be the same. And wow, how brave is that?
Yeah, you have to make a determination that you're not going to accept the status quo anymore. So that's why I respect him for that, even though when I was younger, I didn't respect it a whole lot, because at the age of 8, when you have to get up at 4:30 in the morning and go milk some cows and then go to school, and go to school and have the kids teasing you, talking about cow, horse, and all of that kind of stuff.
Kids this day and age wouldn't even think about cow, milking a cow. Or,
I guess from your perspective of an 8-year-old, you just think he's making your life unnecessarily hard.
Right.
Now, in the hindsight, you're like, I see what he was trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
But there were certain benefits. After you become adult, you look back and you look at the benefits of that, because we used to butcher a cow every year, fill up the freezer. We had a big garden, so we ate good.
Okay.
Even though I didn't go to a sit-down restaurant until I went off to Howard University and went on a football trip.
Yeah.
But the steak that we had to pay for that wasn't as good as the steak that we had on that farm.
Did you guys have a smokehouse?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
We smoked the hams, everything in the
ask.
smokehouse.
My mom, she's, like I was telling you before, she's from Alabama, and she grew up on a pig farm as well. And sort of the same story. Her grandmother was essentially a sharecropper. So my mom grew up picking okra and things like that. And I went and I visited them when I was younger, and it was a different existence, But she tells me all the time about the freshness and the ease of just going out. Her grandmother tells her to go get something from the smokehouse. She'll cut a piece off and bring it back, and they'll have that for breakfast.
Yeah.
So I resonate with hearing that.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
And we had a couple of peach trees and apple trees, and you can go sit in a tree and eat a fresh apple and
Wow.
peaches and all of that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. So there's a couple of things. We skipped to Howard. You playing football there. Let's go back to, I guess we left off with your sister. She was at the forefront of that court case. How did that play out, and then what were the actions that proceeded after that?
Well, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, Virginia Supreme Court in Harrisonburg, and it ruled against Warren County, and the county was required to integrate the school. It was 21 African Americans that marched up that hill in 1959 to go to Warren County High School, which is now Warren County Skyline Middle School. They did name a street. It's not really a street, it's more like a sign, because there's no residence on the street, and the school's address is not even there, but it's called Kilby Way in 2013. So my brothers and sisters, I had two brothers that have passed, and my sister went to Warren County High School, and I was going to Chrysler High School. See, when the court case of Betty Kilby versus Warren County was won, the governor said it would never happen in the state of Virginia integration. So they formed what they call massive resistance. And they built the school right up here. Right now, I believe it's Ressie Jeffers.
Okay.
It's Chrysler High School for African Americans, grades 1 through 12.
Okay.
They did it so fast. They did it so fast that a couple of the workers passed or died.
Oh my goodness.
For a construction accident. A wall collapsed. So let me back up a little bit. 1959, after the kids marched up to the school, there were no white kids in the school. They refused to come. So what they did was they built Chrysler for the blacks, and they built John S. Mosby, where social services is, for the white kids. And that didn't stop my father and him, because the NAACP said once you start this, you can't turn around.
Yeah.
So they didn't turn around. So they admitted the kids in the school. In the first year, it was just African Americans in the school. The the next year, some of the white kids began to come back, but at that time, they was also using taxpayers' money to fund basically a segregated school, which was John S. Mosby. So he filed another lawsuit, and they won that lawsuit. So once those public funds were taken away, they had to wind up closing that school down because those parents could not afford to keep the school open.
I love the momentum of your dad.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I started this. It's not gonna be easy. I'm gonna forge forward. And then all of these wonderful things that came out of his advocacy, out of his engagement, and that is really not the easiest thing to do when you feel like a whole county is, not wanting this to happen in terms of integration. I think we had a couple other questions too. But
Right, I do have to say this. It wasn't my dad alone. It was just a few African Americans, but mainly in the Happy Creek area. His vice president of the NAACP was Charlie Dean. I don't know if you know Suetta Dean or not. Another family, Sam Fletcher.
Okay.
We had the Coleman family. These were individuals that made up to 21 who actually walked up the hill to break the barrier.
It was good that you guys weren't the only intrepid family. It sounds like it was quite a bit of you guys.
It was a few.
Enough to make noise.
It was a few to hold my dad up,
Yeah.
but my family was targeted.
Were they trying to kind of relive like a separate but equal type of philosophy by building those different schools?
Yes.
It's like, okay, I know what the ruling says, but this is what we'll do,
Yes.
and to skirt around that.
That's right.
Okay. Wow. So at that time, because you said high school, but it was 1 through 12. What was that high school called?
It's Chrysler High School.
Chrysler High School.
Right up the hill.
So at that point, how old are you?
At that point, I was in the second grade.
Okay.
So I was 8 years old.
So once, Warren County, for lack of a better term, gives in, you are not going to go to Chrysler anymore. You're going to go to E. Wilson. Is that correct?
Actually, my brothers and sisters,
Okay.
my brother and my sister, my two brothers and my sister, they went to Warren County in 59.
59. Okay.
I went to Chrysler until the fifth grade, actually the sixth grade. I went to, after the fifth grade, I went to E. Wilson Morrison in 1963.
Okay.
For some reason, my father held me back before from going into the elementary school, and he wanted to make sure that I wasn't there by myself. So in '63, it was myself and two other African American young ladies that went to E. Wilson Morrison Elementary School.
So that's what grade is that? Sixth.
Six. I went there to sixth and seventh grade.
Sixth to seventh. All right, and then you went on to
high school, Warren County High School.
Okay.
We didn't have middle schools or junior high schools back then.
That's the part that I'm. It's a little confusing for me, for some of the younger generation, because the way the schools are broke down.
Yeah.
It sounds like you were very talented in football, among other things, in high school.
Yes,
Okay.
I had to make football my sanctuary. Because in the sixth grade, it wasn't very good for me. I'm the only African American in the class at that time. And, the N-word was like my second name.
Wow.
So
It was ubiquitous. It just so used to hearing?
yeah, all the time, especially from, not all of the kids, but a lot of the kids that were extremely racist, and mainly the ones who had failed a couple of years and had some issues.
Mm-hmm. So
after that sixth and seventh grade year, I said, my father wouldn't allow me to fight. If I got into a fight, I was gonna get a whipping at home. So he wanted me to focus mainly on education because he knew how important education was. Because he was only able to finish the seventh grade when he was of school age. So he wanted all his children to get an education, and that's what he strived for. And plus, back then, males, I had two brothers who was 9 and 10 years older than I am, and myself, we were looked at as somewhat of a commodity on the farm because the boys did all of the farm work and the girls did did the housework.
Yeah.
So we really didn't play any sports too much. Well, my brothers didn't play any sports in high school at all, but I had the opportunity. Being the youngest, I was a little more forceful. And after the 7th grade, I said, Dad, I want to play football. Mm-hmm. Since a lot of other kids out there playing football, so I want to play football too. Oh. So the people that treated me bad during the 6th and the 7th grade, I was able to get back on the football field.
All right, so here's my question, because I think sports are very important. I love sports. Some of my greatest memories in life have been athletic achievements. One of the things I loved about sports is I did go to high school in a very rural town, and there was some racism, but the thing that I loved about sports was that for the most part, when that whistle blew, you were able to form a brotherhood that would have been unlikely outside of those lines, parameters, whatever. Back in the early 60s, is that still the case, Or is this a new development?
That was the case on the most part.
Okay.
But you still had some guys that were kind of like holdouts.
Okay.
And you either took care of that on a practice field or the coach took care of it during game time.
Okay.
Because the coach's objective is to win.
Just to win,
Yeah. So if you didn't fit into that equation, you were out of there.
Okay.
Gotta be on the same page with that.
That's right.
I do think sports is, by nature, kind of a meritocracy. So it is a great way to start to get people to judge people off the content of their character and what they can put out versus their skin color. In theory, but I was curious in such a tumultuous time if it still rang true, because for me, I remember being on a football or basketball team with people that you had heard things about or maybe were true, but it seemed like it was a great way to sort of see the humanity in someone,
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I love sports. But I didn't know if even that racism usurped that, which to me it's just so sad to think about, knowing my love for sports and things like that.
Right. Well, my 10th grade year of playing football at Warren County, Chrysler closed down.
Okay.
And more African Americans came there. So it kind of eased up. Even if you felt that way, it was enough African Americans on the team that you wasn't going to get too ugly.
To be the lone soldier is a lot different than to be a minority, where at least you're surrounded by other minorities.
Right, right. Then my 11th grade year, a lot of the guys that I played with in the 10th grade, African Americans, graduated.
Okay.
And it was less of us. And the team wasn't that good. But then my senior year, Mosby closed down. And those children came over. And it's true that there was a camaraderie that was established on the football field. Even though we didn't socialize, there was a certain amount of respect for each other. And I also ran track and played basketball too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I ran track as well.
Yeah.
So that obviously you were good enough to go play at Howard, and at Howard you also studied. Was it math or?
I studied civil engineering
Civil engineering
and business management.
You're a better man than me.
That's why I was on a 5-year plan.
I understand that.
I might have had a 6 or 7 with civil engineering.
Yeah, trying to play football and knowing that that's how you were going to school is kind of rough in civil engineering, especially when you get to thermodynamics, differential equations, and all of those things, and you're trying to date a little bit too.
And this is all valuable information on the history, and it brings it full circle for me and some of the other podcast members that we've been able to interview, and these stories are very valuable and rich. So, I think it's pretty cool to be able to hear this, and then young kids now, and then people, what can we do now, or what are some of the experiences that you've shared about, some tough experiences? Do you have some hopefulness for where we are now, looking back on some of the things that you've experienced with your family and the history?
There is hope for the young kids, but it's certain things that we need to do as a race and as a country. We have to give the young people the knowledge of our history and let them know that just because things were bad back then, that you still need to be proud of the resilience of the African American culture.
We
It's, right now in today's society, it just seems like a lot of the young people are not proud of their culture.
Well, let's talk about that. That's a good segue, actually, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to see from your perspective, and it looks like we have almost 3 different generations here, so it'll be a good conversation. I want to see, through these questions, what is the same and what is different. For example, I'll ask you this first.
Okay.
And it sounds like we kind of already talked about it, but what do you think was the biggest issue from facing the black community during your childhood?
Racism and segregation.
And that would be a lot different, and not saying this doesn't exist, but the overt legislative racism is a lot different when you were growing up. Like, laws that are on the books then don't even exist now, and we do have things that, like I said, I'm not making a statement about what, but I think for me to say we have it just as bad as you guys is just a false statement, and I resist that. I don't know if I'm presumptuous in saying that, but I always resist that. I hear some people my age go, nothing has changed. I was like, well, it's when you listen to stories like like my dog was never killed. I never had to integrate something. I've been in rooms before where I'm the only black person and things like that, and I've been in, I may be the lone, as I said before, lone soldier or things like that, but I could never claim any of the things that you just claimed. It just doesn't exist anymore for me. Those roadblocks.
There's been some movement, even in terms of voting and some of those rights.
But sorry, I cut you off. You were saying the racism itself.
Yeah, the racism itself back then, we still had situations where African Americans weren't allowed to go, or that we were afraid to go.
What would you say, Tina, was the biggest issue?
The drug epidemic.
Okay.
Still some racism, because growing up as a child of mixed race, I still got the names. I got, you're an Oreo cookie, you're a zebra, you're chocolate milk. Those kind of things were still blatantly told to me by kids that were my age, and these are things that they learned in their own homes. It caused some identity issues with me, because I'm like, okay, I'm too dark for people that are white, and I'm too light for people that are black. Then where do I fit in? Like, where do I go to fit in? And so it was really tough for me. And then my dad died of a drug overdose when I was 8. My mom was drinking a lot to deal with that. So I think that those kind of things were happening, kind of co-occurring with the drug epidemic, and then some of the racial tension and racial things that were still happening. I'd say that those are the two that I can remember. But I also go back to the resilient piece of it.
Right.
Like, if these things had not happened to me, would I have had the tools to pass on to my children to show that you can be resilient, that you can overcome adversity, that you can come from a home that's in Section 8 housing and poverty and drug-stricken and teenage pregnancies, which I was a teenage mom, but at that time it was like, you'll be just like your mom, you'll be just like your dad. And so a lot of labeling. But I go back to the resilient part. That was my journey. Those are things that helped to shape who I am. And sharing those pieces of my history has helped my children. And I've raised 8 children. So sharing that with them and helping them pass that on to the next generation. I have 3 grandchildren. So, but those were the 2.
And that's great. But I see that as an exception to the rule. The biggest problem that I see for African Americans today is the family structure.
So
you know?
that would, you actually took my answer. 'Cause that's from my childhood, and it seems like I told you before the podcast that I was born in New York City, but my parents were from the South. I was fortunate to have my mother and father in my life. My dad was actually not, and my mom was mostly raised by her grandmother,
Right.
or her aunt and grandmother. But I would say, not to disparage my parents, I would say we grew up working class. There was one of 6. I was one of 6. At one point, there was four of us, along with my parents, living in a studio apartment in New York. No walls. But I never felt cheated in my childhood. Everything that I ever learned, every useful skill that ever came to me did not come from any sort of like resource. It came from lessons in security that I got from the stableness of my childhood. And I have never felt inadequate in any way because of that. And I think, to me, that is the biggest issue, at least facing my peers, because I think when I look at who I grew up with, all of my black friends, and a lot of family members, it was actually an exception for me to have both parents in the home. And like I said, the most valuable things that I've ever, because I didn't grow up with much, the most valuable things that I ever got was, I said, through osmosis. I wake up and I see how my father ties his tie in the morning. I see how he shaves. I see how he's always on time. I see him never call out of work. I see how he talks to my siblings with love. I see how he treats my mother with love. I see how when the car breaks, he gets under there, he takes off his work suit, he gets into his overalls, and he changes the oil. And he comes out and he shows me how to do it. And I just watch him and I learn things. I learn how to be professional. I learn how to be confident. I learn how to take care of myself. I watch him, go home every day and work out and do these things. And most of the lessons I ever learned from him were not overt and explicit. They were implicit.
Right.
And that, to me, is my biggest skill. And I think if you take my father or mother out of the equation, I do not know if I have those same skills.
Right.
And I look at the percentage of family members in our community who are living in a one-parent household, and it has risen exponentially. And I think there is a correlation, if not causation, with a lot of the issues that we face, among other things. It's always a lot in a pie of issues. But for me, it's funny, you say the crack epidemic, I'm kind of after that. I'm growing up, I'm 95 anymore, so I still see a lot of that.
I'm 75.
Yeah.
yeah. But a lot
I
of
kind of got
single-family
the
households.
whatever wave crashed, that was me. And that's kind of been my experience, and you said that, so I would love to see why you think it is the family structure.
Well, I think it's the family structure because you have 70%, extremely high percentage of illegitimate births in this country among African Americans. And we also have, 30% of the abortions of, by African Americans or females. Without having a two-parent household, especially without having a father figure in that household, it puts the odds against you. You know, the odds are stacked against you. And we look at the drug epidemic as it exists today, is that most of those kids are in pain.
And they've learned
And
how
they
to
look,
use.
yeah, and they look for someone to help them out of that.
Yeah.
And generally, it's the drug dealer.
Yeah.
You know, it could be male or female.
Or if you
He's
look
out
at
there.
someone who's involved in a gang, you essentially are searching for a community,
A
a
family, a
Right.
connection.
That's
And
right.
also they may have learned it because my mom learned when you're in pain, when you're grieving, because she lost her mom when she was 10. She found her unresponsive, but she also saw that her dad would be drinking to deal with it. So when she lost my dad, it was like, oh, what can I do? And she learned that when you lose someone and you're grieving, then drinking is a way to forget about it. Only one thing is you have to wake up the next morning
You wake
and
up.
it's still there. So, I came from a one-parent household. My mom was raising 3 girls to do everything that she could. Something that I think that's trending now, not a positive trend, but because of the drug epidemic and a lot of mental health situations, grandparents are now raising children.
Right.
We see a lot of that in the program with the young people that we serve. The grandparents are struggling to keep up with the technology, to keep up with the homework. They have a safe home, food, shelter, but they are sometimes single grandparents, usually a woman, raising grandchildren from parents that have been incarcerated or dealing with mental health issues or dealing with substance use disorder.
So that's why I say that it's gotten better, but they have come up with other ways to break up the households. One that you just mentioned, incarceration. You know, it's not by accident that 40% of the prisons is populated with black males. You know, these young people, one out of 10 or 1 out of 3, you look at your buddy, he's gonna be incarcerated at one time or another. That's not by accident. It's by design to tear up the family structure because they know how important it is for a male to be in that structure. It lessens the opportunity for the children. And how do you eliminate people or family?
With the father.
You omit the father, and the children will self-destruct in most cases.
Well,
You know, so
this leads me, that's a good point, and the counterpoint that I'll make to that, I'm interested to hear your response, and this is also another question. So one of the questions I have is, what can the black community do to help themselves? And to me, this is kind of how I've always looked at it. I think one of the issues that you said, you know, there was more overt racism back in the day, and I think in a sense that was a blessing in disguise to keeping the black community together, because when you have an overt enemy, it forces you to go to battle. It forces you to come correct, because if not, you will be defeated. Now that we say that there's some of the things, some forces, you know, maybe changed, I think it has given black people a false sense of security, and they have culturally and internally cast things by the wayside that I think may need to come back to benefit us. You know, I talked about before how my parents didn't grow up with both their parents in the home. But one of the things my father says all the time is that his uncles were there to fill that role. I know, for me, I grew up a church boy. I was in church Wednesday night, Friday night, Sunday morning, and Sunday night. I grew up in the Bronx.
Right.
You can get into a lot of shenanigans.
Right.
If you're at church, you're not getting into those shenanigans. You just physically can't.
Yeah.
And the more of your friends that you see at church, we're all here. We're learning to play the drums and the keys, and we're singing, and we're not. You have your own ecosystem.
Positive influences.
So I
and your
think
peers,
there are some things like I think that sometimes people expect the cavalry to come, as I said earlier, I think off camera.
And there's no cavalry.
But what if you told an army the cavalry isn't coming? What kind of response and what kind of valiant effort do you think might happen? And that's kind of how I look at it. I've never seen. I tell people, like, the cavalry's not coming, and if anything, the cavalry that you expect to come has been a cavalry that has been oppressing you since the inception of this battle war, quote unquote. So what if we told each other that the cavalry isn't coming? What do you think would happen? Or what do you even think about that as a perspective? Is that dangerous? Is that something that you would temper or, say that's probably not the best way to look at it? I'm curious for your perspective.
Well, some people would cut and run, and some people would join forces and come up with a solution for their survival. And I think that you mentioned something very interesting is that you came from a background of faith. See, when I was growing up, I was just like you. I was in church at least every Sunday and sometime Wednesday nights too. But we also had a community because we could not go anywhere else but be in our own little community. We had Young Men's Club. We had a Boy Scouts. And we had older adults that was willing to make that sacrifice. And we had very few of my friends went to jail. We have to bring some of those institutions back to the community. Also, another thing, even the kids that didn't have parents, they might have been living with their grandmother or whatever, and if the grandmother didn't go to church, she made the kids get up and go to Sunday school.
Well, that's
the young people, young adults, they don't do that.
Well, I said I think the necessity for it is gone.
Right.
Necessity is the greatest inventor, but also when you take away a necessity, when you take away a reason for a muscle, it atrophies, excuse me. And I think that's something else. And like I said, I had these things growing up, and I think a lot of that has gone by the wayside. And I'm not saying it has to be the church, but it's got to be something. There's got to be a common watering hole. And I also think that there has been
You got to have faith.
You got to have faith.
In something.
Or there has to be a collective values that we can all agree upon. Because I remember when I was younger, it wasn't cool to disrespect your elders under any circumstances. It may have been cool to do things that kids do. And, every kid's going to try to push the boundaries. But there were things that were taboo and forbidden that I think have now, like, it's cool to do, or it's okay to get away with certain things.
Get pass on it, yeah.
And I don't think politically that's going to come from a legislation. That's going to come from a cultural reformation within us, I think.
So what I heard you say is some of the things that we can do as a Black community in terms of enriching the culture is having faith, staying connected to, people around you that are doing positive things that can encourage you, learning, being a sponge. What are some of the other things that you think we could do as a community to help with some of these deficiencies, lack thereof?
I think as a community, we also need, I used to know all my neighbors. And if I did something bad, my parents would know about it before I got home. And then if it was bad enough, I might have got a whipping there. And now the parents are so protective of these children. And they don't trust the other adults to do the right thing. We've got to get back to that it takes a village to raise a child. You can't, in a lot of cases, you can't do it alone. So you got to rely upon your neighbor. We have to rely upon our neighbors to maybe go pick our child up. Tell the child that, hey, you're doing something wrong. It's not that we dislike you, it's you're doing something wrong, and if you want to continue to be with us, you're going to have to make a change. The drug situation is so bad now that we have to do it from a proactive instead of this reactive thing that Warren County has right now. They have a reactive approach at the court system.
Reactive and prevention versus prevention.
Yeah, and it's reactive, but by the time you're reacting, it has sweltered within the community. I ran for town council, and my first thing on my platform was to open up the youth center. I couldn't believe I grew up with the youth center here. They're just now getting it back. But it went for 10 years or more that the kids didn't have a youth center. And that was so helpful to me from the standpoint that I didn't have to go to the fast food place and hang out in the car with my girlfriend. We could go to the youth center. We could socialize there. You had mentors right there that allowed you to talk to them in a relaxed atmosphere. If you needed help with your homework, you got the help from your homework. If it wasn't from an adult, it could be from one of your school peers. So that helped me out a lot because I was real rambunctious.
A community center saved my life. My mom said, "Don't tell the school what's happening here." So if we didn't have food, we didn't tell the school.
Right.
If we had situations that were happening at home, we didn't tell the school. But she did trust a community center. She would say, "Hey, they've got bag lunches over there. Tell them we don't have food." I'm like, okay. So me and my sisters, other people in the community would go to this community center, and we found mentors that could help us. We found food. We found positive things that were happening. We found enrichment programs. We found field trips and things, and it was a trusted thing that my mom was like, okay, go ahead, you can share. When it came to the school, it was like, you don't share. If you do, you'll be separated and you won't see your siblings again. So I'm a product of a community center. I am a huge advocate for community centers and the enrichment that it brings, but also the positive adult role models, because statistics show that 1 in 3 kids grow up without a positive role model in their lives, and then they get involved in things that are not so positive. So that was so thank you for those answers to what we can do. A community center is one of the things now that are up and coming here with Samantha Barber and her crew.
Right. And as I said, it makes you get the children back into the church at least for Sunday school. I'm not talking about they have to be Bible thumpers or something, but I'm talking so that they can get an understanding of morality out of their environment that's holding them back.
Well, that's what I was kind of talking about. It's like there was a morality that existed out of everything. I don't care what you saw on MTV or what someone else told you. It was like, you knew right from wrong. And like I said, teenagers will push the boundaries. It's the aspect of being a teenager. But there were certain things where you would understand that this is wrong and we're not going to indulge in that. And if there's no common, like I said, place to spread that value, it becomes hard. But you guys were talking about community center, and that kind of leads to the last question I kind of want to round out with. You know, we talked a little bit about what we kind of have to do internally. What would you say other communities could do to help the Black community?
As I said, make sure that there are programs out there
Okay.
that are easily accessible for children of all backgrounds. And what's very important is that other communities that are better off allow their children and teach their children to commingle with people of maybe a disadvantaged background and not look down upon it.
I'm
You
so
know?
glad you said that, and I was hoping that would be your answer. I'm so glad you said that because I think it's very important for both parties. For example, like if my father, one of the things that he always did is he always made sure he was a mailman, so he would take me on his route to nicer neighborhoods. He would show me what was possible, and I think it's important because it's about perspective from each community. If you are from racist side, if you are from a poor community, it would behoove you to go and see that poverty is not the only thing that you're destined for. And then if you're from a more privileged community, it'd be nice to go, oh, these are what some people deal with. So what can we do to help lift everyone up,
Right.
you know, to be more aware of everything that's going on? And I think the things that you're saying that would help us would help everyone,
Right.
you know?
Right. We definitely need a kinder, gentler community. You know, half the people don't even know their neighbors anymore.
Yeah.
You know, they don't talk to each other. We're not talking to each other. We're just going about our lives and trying to survive. But that's not good. It's not good.
No.
You know, regardless of whether you're white, black, or anything, we all are citizens of the community. You know.
We talked about that off camera, and I think that's really important because I think some of the issues that we're facing are just generally issues that America is facing. But if you're already kind of at a different point, it's going to hit you a little bit harder. So if we can figure that out in conjunction with everyone else, and like I said, we have the support from other communities, I think that would benefit the whole nation. And everyone's calling for healing right now in so many different areas.
That's right.
But I know we're getting over probably close to an hour now, so I don't want to run too long because I do want to share some stuff outside of this podcast with you. But I thought it was very interesting to hear my perspective, your perspective, and then your perspective. I said off camera that one of the most life-changing things I ever heard in my youth was a Tuskegee Airman talk about his experience, and I'm getting the same feelings that I got from him hearing, you know, what you went through, and it makes me not want to squander all the blessings that I have. So I appreciate you paving the way for everyone who came before you, and as someone from the younger generation, I will try my best not to drop the baton and carry it on. But we appreciate you. Tina, thank you for sharing your experiences, and we'll have more that I'll try to share with you guys about the history of Warren County and the Kilby family and how they paved the way, and some of those other families that we talked about as well. But you'll see more of that, and thank you guys for another great episode, the first episode of a new season, and we will see you guys later.
That was amazing.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.